I don't think I will ever fully get used to the kind of almost whiplash feeling when a flare starts. It kind of reminds me of the crash test dummy videos. If you've never seen one before, it's just like the Department of Safety films their crash tests. So they have a car on tracks and it's zooming at different speeds into a concrete wall, and it has crash test dummies in a car with all these sensors on them to measure the force and everything else. And they're always kind of shocking when you first see them, just because of how quickly the car stops when it hits that wall. Well, I feel kind of like one of those crash test dummies when I start a flare. It's not just all of the symptoms, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but it's that quick stop to feeling like you were coping, or like feeling like I was coping, like I had things pretty well figured out. Not just me, but all the doctors, all the treatments, all the stuff, right? The pacing myself, those kind of things, to where I feel like I'm functioning as best as I can for what I have. And yeah, it just feels like truly hitting the wall, but hitting the wall from going a pretty high speed. It's really kind of a different kind of shock. That sounds really dramatic, but it feels really dramatic when it's happening, to me at least. I'm going to talk about not just, okay, this is kind of like, this is how my symptoms change in a flare, but also kind of how it affects how I'm feeling emotionally, and how I'm able or not able to function mentally, because as we know, that's affected too. The kind of things that typically trigger me into a flare, I think, at least from what I've read and heard, are fairly typical. I really can't wait to hear from you guys about what kind of things trigger your flares. The first thing that really tends to trigger it is if I have not paced myself well, or not been able to, just because of things that come up. And I've really pushed way past the energy and the kind of like, it's hard to describe because it's mental energy, physical energy. I mean, it's everything. But when I've pushed myself way too far, I will often end up in a flare. I try very hard to avoid that. Whenever the stress levels in my life are significantly higher than average, um, and especially if it stays that way, for a good chunk of time, I will almost always end up going into a flare. Usually, interestingly enough, when that level of stress has finally kind of broke and come down a bit, that's when the flare tends to hit. It doesn't tend to hit, in the middle of all the stress, at least for me. Again, love to hear how that works for you guys. Also, getting regular sick. Hate to do air quotes already. Getting, a cold or a flu, or even getting like a cold sore, fever blister, any kind of virus or typical bacteria thing. I can pretty much count on going into a flare when I've got one of those. It sucks exponentially. Ooh, say that again. Take two. It sucks exponentially because you're not only sick, which sucks for all of us, but you're in a flare. That's just so intense. At least for me, it sure is. I used to go into a flare almost every time I traveled. Again, not usually right at the beginning. It's usually toward the end of the travel, or really for me, it tends to be once I'm back home, then the flare hits. But I have learned some stuff, and because I noticed that was happening, I've made some adjustments to how I travel, and it's not happening every time now, which I'm really happy about. Let's get into what is a flare for me. Obviously, I have chronic illnesses that include chronic pain. One of them is also an autoimmune disease, possibly two. They haven't decided yet. And I went into all the details on that in my first video. Please forgive the production quality. I am learning, and that was my very, very first. So I kind of tend to, my baseline pain, when I talk about all over, all the different places, my baseline pain is I'd say about a 4 to a 5, really, depending on the time of the day, because some of the things I got going on, the pain gets worse with activity. So in a flare, my pain level, when I'm kind of factoring it in overall, all the different spots on my body, areas of my body, is bumped up to a 6. Fairly often, it will kind of go between, say, a 6 or a 7 during a flare. The other aspect of the pain that is real fun during a flare is that rather than having pain that kind of sort of comes and goes, flows back and forth during a day, which is typical, during a flare, the pain is almost always constant. Instead of going, kind of flowing up to, say, a 4 or 5 and backing off a little bit, during a typical day, it is sometimes fluctuating a little bit. It's going like 6 to 7 instead of like 0 to 5 in a day. Although I really, honestly, I never have zeros, but you get the picture. So the intensity of the pain is increased, frequency of the pain is increased. And then, just for funsies, I will oftentimes have pain in areas that I infrequently have it when I'm not flaring. Just as an example, right? My neck, right shoulder, right hand, well, actually both hands worse on the right hand, right hip, and right foot are my everyday typical pain areas. Oftentimes in a flare, I will have rib pain, usually more on the right, quite often actually in the front part of my ribs and my sternum. I will oftentimes during a flare, this is so fun, I will also have significant pain in my knees. Again, worse on the right side. Most of my stuff is worse on the right side than the left. So fun new areas, or fun haven't been around for a while areas when I'm in a flare versus when I'm not. All of that together for me means that my mobility, which is reduced because of the pain, but also the balance issues, goes down because I'm not even as strong or stable, and I'm having more pain than I do when I'm not in a flare. So that's all that kind of physical stuff, pain related physical stuff. The really even more intense, I'll use that word a lot, unfortunately, the even more intense side of a flare for me is, oops, sorry, Diego decided to come sit down, is the fatigue. Fatigue has been the more difficult side of my chronic illnesses for me since the beginning. It is so debilitating, and it is very hard. I think a lot of you are in the same boat. It's very hard for me as being the person who would get it done. If something needed to be done and somebody else wouldn't do it, I would get it done. It's really hard not physically being able to do that. I think for me, that's been a really big one to try and accept, cope with, figure my best ways to work around, is the fatigue. On a regular level, my fatigue, with all the different things that we've figured out and treatments and supplements, my everyday fatigue had actually been improved quite a bit, which means that for me, I had gotten to the point where I could not get through a day without falling asleep in the middle of the day. This was not intentionally laying down to go to sleep. This would be, okay, I'm going to go sit down on the couch for a bit before I do XYZ. Whether it was something I wanted to do or something, a chore. And I would sit down and I would wake up hours later, not like a half an hour later, hours, 2, 3 hours later. And that was happening almost every day. So that's how it was until whole new rounds of testing again about 6 months ago and figuring out some things that I needed some supplementation with. And so that really improved to where I only needed a nap maybe once or twice a week. And maybe it's an hour ish. And it's to the point where I don't sit down and just fall asleep. I sit down and I realize, whoa, I'm really, really tired. I don't think I'm going to get anything else done today unless I have a little nap. And I don't have to set an alarm anymore. I will wake up usually between an hour, hour and a half when I take a nap now. That's when I'm not flaring. So that was a big improvement for me. When my most recent flare, which is just finishing, which is kind of how I figured out what this video is going to be about. My most recent flare had me back to the point where I think most days of it, there may have been 1 or 2 days toward the end, I was back to, okay, I'm going to sit down for a bit, take a rest, read whatever, watch a video, and then I'm gonna go do XYZ. And again, this included things I really wanted to do, and then ended up with that waking up, not even realizing I was falling asleep. That really crazy, just falling asleep. So that's really intense for a lot of reasons. One, you can't really do much of anything in a day, and two, because I was sleeping during the day, even as fatigued as I was, it made it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep solidly at night. So it kept perpetuating itself. That really, for me, makes a flare even worse when no matter whether I'm waking up from one of those naps that I didn't even want to take or waking up in the morning and not just feeling my regular still tired, like waking up with my battery at say 60% or 70%, I'm waking up in the morning at like 50 if I was lucky. So that's a really, really hard way, at least for me, that's a very hard way to exist. So definitely the fatigue is, for me, it's the worst side, at least to this point. I will sometimes get totally new or totally different levels of things that I forget are even related to my chronic illnesses. One of the really weird ones is I already have very dry eyes, and I'm wearing contacts right now. Sometimes I wear glasses. My eyes are very dry, whether I'm wearing contacts or glasses. They'll just tell you they're just that way. And they're pretty sensitive to light too. When I'm in a flare, that dryness gets so much worse. Just to kind of give an idea of what I mean by that is on a regular day, if I'm wearing my contacts, I usually have to put in some drops 2 times during the day. When I'm in a flare, I am having to put drops in at least 3 or 4 times a day, sometimes more, depending on if I'm doing a lot of reading or things like that, or a lot of driving. That'll tell you how much more dry my eyes are when I'm flaring. The other thing is, and this has just gotten more consistent in flares in the last, I'd say, year or so. It was pretty rare initially. I will run these really weird intermittent low-grade fevers. And I'm talking like 99.5-ish, right? And it'll run for a few hours and then it'll stop. And then, half a day later, it'll come back. It is really weird. I have seen that that's not uncommon, but that's another thing I'd love to hear from you guys on, is if that's something that happens with you frequently when you're flaring. I have also, for many years, I've had IBS. Gosh, more than 20 years, I'd say. It was very, very active when I was much heavier, about 100 pounds heavier or 90 pounds heavier. It was very active then. I had weight loss surgery and my IBS just went away for a long, long time. Well, all the way until 2017, when my first chronic illness really showed up strongly and was diagnosed. So it's off and on when I'm not flaring, thankfully now. But when I'm flaring, it's on, and it's on the whole time I'm flaring. I have to say, I have to fight hard not to feel sorry for myself on that one. It just feels like adding insult to injury. It really does. I do kind of feel sorry for myself with that one, and have to kind of shake myself a little bit and see it as part of the big picture. It doesn't make it better, but I feel less picked on when I just see it as the larger part of the larger chronic illness picture. And headaches. I have not ever really been a frequent headache person. Tension headaches here and there, sinus headaches whenever my nose was stuffy. That was it. Since I've started having more issues with my spine, with the dish and the ankylosing spondylitis, I have been having more frequent headaches, typically when I wake up. And I assume it's just because my neck is pressing, or my certain nerves exiting the spine, the vertebrae in my neck have just been pushed on, and that's what it's decided to start, from what I understand. However, when I'm flaring now, I'd say, and again in the last year or two, I will have headaches off and on all day, every day of the flare. Thankfully, they're not super intense. We're not talking migraines here, but it's really difficult when you're already having more pain elsewhere in your body, your fatigue is worse, and adding a headache makes it even more difficult. I find it really it's mostly when it affects my thinking. It's very hard to think. It's very hard to do something, to think clearly when your head hurts. Somehow when the rest of my body hurts, I seem to be able to kind of that actual pain doesn't seem to get in the way of me being able to think. There's the regular brain fog, but this isn't that. This is like truly when my head is hurting, it is very hard for me to focus on anything, much less complete anything. And maybe I'm just that way because I'm not somebody who typically has lived their life with frequent headaches. I'd be interested to hear from people on that one too. So those extra fun things intensify or decide to come around when I'm flaring too. And again, they all kind of have varied, but unsurprisingly, as things progress, they seem to be more frequent or more constant when I'm flaring. Looking at all that, getting a picture of that for my flares at least, it helps me to realize there's a lot going on in my body and with my brain and with my emotions when I'm flaring. Rosie, leave it. Good girl. There's so much going on mentally, emotionally, and physically during a flare that it's not that surprising that it really does bring my typical lifestyle abilities functioning. Really is kind of like just going from 50 miles an hour to like 2 or 0 for me. And it's very hard not to get stuck and just want to put off everything and to be angry and sad that I have to put off everything while I'm in a flare, and to not be anxious about things that I have to reschedule, but also not to be sad when I look and think, oh my gosh, is this going to get worse? Am I going to have more flares? What's my life going to be, in the future with all of this? And when you have all those, for me, when I have all that stuff understandably running through my head, it's hard enough to kind of deal with it and feel it and kind of put it into perspective when I'm not having everything that's going on during a flare. But trying to cope with all that when I'm already really depleted by being in a flare, it really is very hard not to get stuck and not to feel hopeless and not to want to stop trying to improve my life when I'm not in flare, meaning like long-term giving up things that make me happy or that are important to me, things like that. It's really hard not to start thinking and going in that direction when you're so depleted and so pulled down by everything that's happening when I'm in a flare. So that is really what kind of spurred me on to looking at flares and talking about flares in this video. It isn't our everyday, thankfully, but a flare isn't just a few bad days or a bad week or even a bad several weeks. It almost kind of like echoes in between. I don't myself, at least right now, worry every non-flare day, every good day or every better day. I don't feel like I have that shoe ready to drop, but I do have to constantly be aware that the flares will happen no matter how great I get at pacing and everything else. They are going to happen. I really want to have things ready and in place so that I can use them to help me quickly when I am in a flare. But I don't want to live my life worrying and feeling that the flare is ready to drop on me at any time. I don't think I'll ever be able to not be shocked when a flare hits. Being petrified that one's going to hit when I'm on a good day just really, it doesn't make sense, and I don't want it to rob me of those good days and those better days, almost good days, whatever you want to call them. So that's kind of what I've come out of this flare with. It's not like being worried about them every day is going to stop them or make them less or make them easier or less shocking when they hit. So I'm really going to continue to do the things that help me feel as good as I can feel, function as well as I can function on the non-flare days. Because I need to enjoy and feel good about my life on the non-flare days, almost more on the non-flare days, so that hopefully I can look forward to them when I'm in a flare. Not at that point yet, but that's what I'd like to work towards. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching all the way to this point. If you enjoyed it, please, I'd appreciate it if you can click that like button. If you'd like to continue to be notified when I have a new video coming out, please subscribe. I have lots of plans for the future for this challenge. Take two again, including eventually doing, some interviews with folks, viewers and other folks, and just some conversations, maybe some lives. Okay, definitely some lives. I just don't know how soon. To just be able to talk. I mean, I really hope this channel is going to be more than just you watching and listening to whatever I'm putting out. I really want to include folks and have it be more of a community. I'd like it to be kind of like a really loose peer support group. So thank you again for watching. Please like, love it if you'd subscribe. Please give me your feedback in the comments. I'd love ideas on things that you'd like to see videos about. I also would love to know if you would like to contribute to some videos or lives or the channel in any way. That'd be awesome too. Thanks again for the third time. Again, I hope the day is treating you gently. Talk to you soon. Bye.